basically it was my job to do some training for Jewish social workers then employed by Norwood, Jewish Blind Society, Ravenswood, and what have I left out? Jewish Welfare Board, which became Jewish Care. And there was a training course on Judaism and Jewish matters, which had been paid for by the Doron Foundation, I think, and which required to be organised. And one of the sessions we had was of women in Judaism, and the social workers came from a whole range of backgrounds. They were very lively, very disparaging of some of the speakers who had come. And this woman, Debbie Wiseman, who spoke about the place of Jewish women in Jewish history, was inspiring. And for once, they urged me, the social workers, to find somebody else inspiring. And I'd heard of this woman, Nomi Gretz, who'd written a book about abuse in the Jewish community, an Israeli, married to a Masorti rabbi, Tzvi Gretz. And we had the money to pay for these people to come over from wherever they were, and she gave a really inspiring talk, but it was at the end of it that people began to say, if there is abuse in the Jewish community, there must be abuse in the English Jewish community, and why have we not heard about it? At which point I suggested, always looking for something for them to do, that they should set up an inquiry amongst themselves and their colleagues to ask of their client base who in the last couple of years had experienced such abuse at home that if there'd been somewhere to go, they would have gone. And over a period of a year, they gathered this information and they got 20 different respondents. And we thought 20 was an enormous number. Only clientele of Jewish social services, only people who were brave enough to disclose to their social workers, which we knew some wouldn't, and only within a very really small clientele. And also the fact that not all the social workers were involved in this project. And it was a result of that that a small group of us got together to discuss it. And that was the point at which we had a meeting at Vera Grudzinski, who kindly lent us her home. And at that point, Lorna appeared. Well, I mean, I knew Lorna from before, but she appeared at this meeting. The noise.
I remember the excitement of starting this group, and I suppose it's almost putting our stamp money on the table. I've even got here the very first letter that Judy wrote to me, asking me would I go to Leeds with her, and we discuss in the letter here the times of the trains, and that excitedly that we've been offered a home where we can have a meeting, which I've also got the minutes of that very first meeting that we held at the home of Vera Grudzinski in November, and that would have been 1991.
Who was there?
Actually, at the meeting, we've got Michelle Goldberg, Vera, Lucy Hammond, Joanna Milan, Lucy Nathan, somebody called Yafir Tamir, and of course, Judy Siskin. And other names that come to my mind in the very, very early days are Tanya Novick, Ruth Lindberg, Joanna Milan, and Stephanie Barnett. These meetings were very, very informal, but they really served the chance to help us think about the foundations of Jewish Women's Aid. And it's funny that all these little pieces of paper, these two very early ones, I've kept in my JWA file, which is over 25 years old now.
We hadn't really started we were sitting around talking. Social workers were gathering, we hoped, information, and we were wondering whether we were capable of setting anything up. But I had heard there was a group of women in Leeds who were running a helpline, and after a certain delay we managed in fact to get through to them and to arrange. Lorna and I went up on the train to meet them, and we invited them to come to London and address a public meeting, at which point we sat with our address books and invited everybody who would ever heard of, women that would ever heard of, and communities which we managed to get into, to invite representatives to come to this meeting, which was at the West London Synagogue, and two great women from Leeds came down. That's Sheila Saunders, Zichrona Libracha, and Elaine Grazin, who everybody now knows. And they came down from Leeds to address this meeting. They were amazed at the turnout, as I was. I chaired the meeting, and I looked out and I saw women wearing shaitels from Stamford Hill, who I'm sure had never been in a Reformed synagogue in their lives. And looking round, I also saw some secular social work colleagues of mine who I'm sure had never been in a shul in their lives of any sort. And it was really very inspiring meeting. Jane was there, Lorna of course was there, and I think you might hear from Elaine how she experienced it. And the meeting formally produced the resolution that there should be an organisation set up called Jewish Women's Aid.
I think it must have been in 1990 or 1991, and I'd met Judy, who invited me, if you like, to come to a public meeting that I believe was going to launch this new organisation, Jewish Women's Aid. And I asked her what it was all about. And having been at the meeting, I was absolutely shocked that domestic abuse could happen and did happen and was happening in the Jewish community. And so I volunteered to do whatever I could, whenever I could, not knowing what on earth I could do, except I think I probably gave a very small donation and then waited for the call to come, which eventually it did. And I've been a volunteer ever since.
What was it that brought you to the beginnings of Jewish Women's Aid? What became Jewish Women's Aid?
I'd always, through being a social worker originally, I was always drawn to really try to understand about domestic violence. And so when Judy approached me, it wasn't very difficult for me to say yes. I'd always been aware of the issue and always been aware of the amount of denial. So it was a very natural group for me to want to join with other women who felt the same, to try and really do something and to raise the awareness within the Jewish community.
So it was actually very natural for you to...
It was a very easy thing, it was a very natural thing, and I also felt that I knew other women with whom I'd been involved in social action projects who I knew would support us and would also feel excited about trying to deal with this challenge right the way across the whole of the Jewish community.
After that first meeting where I had offered my services as a volunteer, there was quite a wait, and I didn't at the time realise how much organisation was going on in the background that I was not involved with. But eventually Judy kindly got back to me and said, "You volunteered, what would you like to do?" or something like that. And I, in fact, the result was that I volunteered for training on the helpline, and also very, very diffidently to try and raise a little bit of money for JWA. I had no confidence at the time that I'd be successful at either, but the helpline training was enormously helpful. It was detailed. I think my trainer was Linda at the time, and that's about the time I met Tanya as well. It was detailed, and as a result, I worked on the helpline for many years. The fundraising was even more tricky, but we did develop some strategies, and of course JWA did have a little funding for the helpline, I think, and we were able to build on that and to build a lot of goodwill among Jewish women in my community and in other communities as well. And that's really been the focus of the work that I was doing as a volunteer. And later I was invited to join the board, which I did, and I served on the board for 12 years.
What Jane was too modest to say to you was the great part she played in setting up the refuge, in making it really a home.
Well, I was in good company, and I was on the Refuge Development Committee, and I think that may have been as a result of being on the board, and it was a very, very interesting time because we needed so much expertise, and my husband was very, very helpful in helping us look at the sort of property we might need, although we didn't get a property that way in the end. But even more important, I think, was the expertise from people like Ruth Lindberg, Judy herself, of course, on how it should be arranged, what would be necessary, how it would be operated, etc. So that was a great interest. It took up an enormous amount of time, but what an achievement when the refuge finally opened. And then I went on to the Refuge Management Committee. Also, because I was still on the board, it was appropriate. And I served on that for a few years more.
Well, I was on the board for a number of years, but I think the most important thing that I felt coming from south of the river, from a smaller community, I felt this urge to make sure that not just only people from South London, but also nationwide, that people from smaller communities were really made aware of JWA and just what it offered. And that was very often through word of mouth, through contacting all one's contacts, and not necessarily through larger publicity PR campaigns, but really in a very understated, quiet way, just channeling through to make sure that we were in magazines, we were in synagogue reviews, all those kind of places, but also just through word of mouth, getting the new contacts and really raising the flag and the awareness.
One of the hardest jobs was to convince certain sections of the community that there was a problem of domestic abuse. Nobody really wanted to believe that it was happening in their community. And very often you would hear, oh yes, we know it happens, but not to us, it's somebody else, or it's, you know, it's not as bad as you think, or whatever. And sadly, although JWA has made huge strides in its outreach to communities of all shades of opinion and observance, that attitude still persists.
Very much so.
And so it's a hard job, but you can't give up on it. You have to keep chipping away at it. And to be fair, we did get some support from rabbis in the early days, which we were very grateful for, and I think we exploited it whenever and wherever we could. And in the events that we put on, small as they may have been, they were hard work to do, but it was just as important to raise awareness as it was to raise money, don't you think?
Yes, I think that's a very important point that Jane has just said, to raise awareness, because sometimes we'd be asked to go to meetings, some were sort of out quite a long way out in the sticks, and you knew that the meeting had been staged for a particular reason, and maybe it was just a small group, but it was just as important to spend plenty of time, and you were aware that there was a level of denial going on, but it was constantly chipping away, as well as Julie has said on the PR front, how important it was to pinpoint all the people in all the different communities, those people that would be able to help us, and also those people who we knew had access to the synagogue magazines, local press and national press. It was really looking a global way at everything that was possible, and targeting, almost looking at a map and saying, okay, that community there, who have we got there? This person could do that, that person works on this newspaper, that one works on another newspaper. It really was a coordinated effort on every single level, and it was consistent and persistent, and it was hard work, but it was challenging, and we did begin to get through.
I think one of the things that we did do was, when we went to small meetings, or large meetings for that matter, we encouraged women to join us, to become members, give them a stake, if you like, in the work that we were trying to do and doing. And I remember going to a small meeting with Tanya, and people listened very attentively, but it was only after the meeting finished that a woman came up to me and said, my mother was abused for many, many years, and nobody believed her, and there was nothing she could do about it. There was no resource available. And then came the killer remark, because we had spoken about the importance of getting any injuries photographed by your GP and the abuse notified. And she said, and the abuser, my husband, was the doctor. And that gave us all a lot of pause for thought, if you like. But we created new members with new skills and new talents, and they were all most welcome.
Can I say what I think was really, really important, we just said about, we always, after meetings, however small they were, we always hung
Always
around
somebody.
afterwards, because it was after the meeting, exactly what Jane has said, that someone came and spoke about their friend's friend, or somebody they knew of. So we all would always put in the extra time after a meeting, because that was the key time when we were really needed.
I suppose the very first worst problem was the getting people involved in the organisation, because initially everybody who was involved also in their own career and their own work, and it also was not within our area of expertise, except Lorna, who seems to have been born with an understanding of how to do it. It wasn't in our area of expertise to raise public awareness and to understand the whole issue of public relations. And we had great difficulty in breaking through. People who volunteered were nice, kind people who were able to offer themselves on the helpline, like Jane did, or to help possibly in other respects. But they did not have the go-getting attitude that we needed throughout the country in order to get the organisation up and running and before the eyes of women who might need us. And I thought that was our worst problem. At the same time that we were developing, the chief rabbi, the new incumbent, is that the right word, incoming chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, asked Rosalind Preston to conduct a review into the state of Jewish women in the UK. And I was fortunate enough that she asked me to take part in this on the welfare side. And therefore, from the beginning, we had her support and therefore the support of this highly placed group of people who were running the whole inquiry. And I think that gave us a big boost, and we decided to have a public meeting to inform the community that we had formed this organisation again. I came down from Leeds. Wendy Greengross spoke very movingly. Lorna read somebody's testimony, which was a true testimony and afterwards used in the Preston report. And we made an appeal, and if I remember correctly, we got £18,000 as a result of this appeal, which was, people gave money, it wasn't gifted, it wasn't gift-aided, or whatever the right word is, they just gave it. And that was down to Claire Raff, my young cousin, who had organised that meeting. And as we walked out, we got a parking ticket on our car, Ronnie and I. I was very annoyed. So we made contact very quickly with other women's organisations that were involved in abuse, who helped us with advice and support, and one of whom from the Charities Evaluation Society advised us to go for a refuge. But also the Jewish women's organisations, after some discussion, decided not to actually, they did support us in every possible way, I'm sorry, they decided not to in fact incorporate us into what they did because they're an umbrella organisation. But we were one of the earliest members of JWA who gave us full support, particularly the League of Jewish Women, several members of whom volunteered right at the beginning. Helen Goswell, for example, also Zichrona Livracha. We've lost a number of very good people.
And Kathy Shaw also at the same
Kathy
first
Shaw,
meeting.
right. And they volunteered to join the helpline, which was perhaps the worst possible thing to volunteer for, because I had devised, together with some friends in the profession, the most gruelling, the first training courses were gruelling. I wrote the most awful case studies for them to discuss. I remember one friend of mine rang me up after she said, I'm continuing with it, but it is really difficult. And I don't think they ever got such difficult calls as the ones that I put up.
Good training.
Very good training.
We did do some role play during those training sessions.
Oh yes, that's
which made people, I think we decided to sit back to back so that we couldn't see the other person.
Well, that's
and
the
there was a caller and a helpline volunteer.
And also telephones.
They were difficult. They really were. But it was important that we were prepared because we never knew. And Judy was talking about the League. The League invited me and probably lots of other people to speak at many of their local regular meetings, which was another opportunity to get volunteers, to get the message across, to recruit members, to get a bit of awareness and a little bit of money and so on. So it was all very, very valuable help.
Yes, that's true. There was lots of trotting off to League of
Yes.
Jewish Women meetings and various
Weekso
WITSO meetings, and
And the students, UJIS was also
B'nai B'rith
involved.
meetings.
Yes.
Lots of places asking us to go and talk, but also those training courses, they bonded us all together.
Of course, of course. And they have stood us in good stead, if only for the lessons that we learned about confidentiality and about listening and being non-judgmental and so on and so forth. So it's all been very good.
I want to hear about the case studies now.
Oh.
looking forward. Well, I'm just delighted that now there are so many women involved in the organisation of Jewish Women's Aid. It's incredible to me that so many much younger and more energetic people have come to volunteer, and I would suggest that I think one of the best things we did should be revived, which is that we got as many women as possible at the time that we could get hold of to be supporters and members. A wide amount. We didn't mind if they paid very little to become members, as long as they signed that they were in agreement with our aims and objectives, and I really would like to revive that. And I'm grateful that so much has been done.
And look forward to the next 30 years.
Well, I look forward to as long as I've got.